Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to talk about chapter number 15, data processing. This is the most exciting time for as a researcher. I can certainly tell you that anytime I get the data, I get really excited. First of all, let's look at some of our learning objectives for this chapter. We have four learning objectives. First, we want to talk about some overview of the data analysis procedure. Pretty much we're going to talk about 5 steps. Second, I want you to really get an understanding of validation and editing. And also, number 3, I want you to really understand how important it is to clean the data before we begin our analysis. Number 4, I want you to become familiar with tabulations and some basic statistics analysis. Okay, you can look at it. This is a process view. We have 5 key steps in the whole important process of data analysis. Step number 1, validation and editing. Step number 2, coding. Step number 3, data entry. Step number 4, data cleaning. And step number 5, tabulation and statistical analysis. First of all, let's look at step number 1. In step number 1, we have 3 different processes. The first process is called validation. Why do we want to do validation? Basically because sometimes the field interviewers, they cheat. And we want to make sure that we at least get 20% of interviewers being audited, kind of, so that we make sure that the data integrity is ensured. For example, one of the questions we're asked, was a person actually interviewed? How do we do that? Well, we just contact the person to see if that person has actually been interviewed by one of our interviewers. Another question we ask that did the person who was interviewed qualify to be interviewed? For example, if we ask for Latino millennial and we want to make sure that that person fall into the category Latino millennial, defined as Latinos who were born between 1980 and 1995. So we'll ask how old this person is, so that we know that it's sure that he or she is qualified to be interviewed. Or sometimes we want to know if it's a more intercept interview, to see if the interview was actually taking place at the mall. And also we want to know if the interviewer covered the entire survey or just covered a partial survey and then falsify the rest of the information. You get the idea. Basically, validation, basically to do some kind of quality control to make sure that field interviewers have done their job properly and ethically. Second part of the step number 1 is called editing. Again, we look at the completed questionnaire to see if some of the questions were not answered, or if the question was answered but the recorded answers are not there. So that's kind of we actually usually go through the process of the tedious process. I'll have to tell you that we go through each paper. Now in the old days usually they're kind of paper based, so we look at each questionnaire to make sure that those the answers are properly filled out, so that there are no mistakes or errors. And the third component is that called skip pattern. Basically, that sequence in which later questions are asked based on the respondent's answer to an earlier questions. So let's look at the one of the example that we can see from the one of the questionnaire you guys are very familiar with. Remember that questionnaire they did uh, when using Quadrex, segmenting the college student market for movie theater attendance. If you look at the question number one, did you attend at least one movie at a movie theater in the past year? Now you can see that if you answer yes, and then continue to do question number two, three, all the way down to question number 10. But if your answer is no, and then you are instructed to skip to question number 8, which is actually to the bottom of the questionnaire, demographics. So as you get kind of idea that this is called a skip pattern. Now let's say if someone answered first question no, and this person continued to answer question 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then there's something going on. We have to exclude this response because obviously the respondent wasn't paying attention when he or she answered the questions. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. Continue with our question number. That's not the question. Excuse me. Step number 2. So let's look at the step number 2 called coding. So what is coding? The coding is a process of grouping and assigning numeric codes to the various responses to a question. Now clearly we have two types of questions or question format as we discussed in earlier lectures. The first is called closed-ended questions coding, which is very easy because the numerical codes have already been assigned to the various responses on the questionnaires, and as you can see from the movie attendance questionnaire that we looked at previously, all questions are pretty much let me take a look. All questions are pretty much pre-coded. For example, if you look at question number 2, we have very unimportant coded as 1, somewhat unimportant as 2, and somewhat important as 3, and very important as 4. So this is kind of, if you look at all 10 questions, they're pre-coded because they are all close-ended questions, as you can see that. So closed-ended questions are very, very easy to code. Now let's look at open-ended questions coding. This is much more complex. Open-ended question coding, we have this 4 steps again. Step number 1, list responses. Step number 2, consolidate responses. Step number 3, set codes. Step number 4, enter codes. Let me look at the following example to show what I mean by each different steps. And the question is really open-ended. Like, why do you drink that brand of beer? In response to the previous brand mentioned in answer to the previous question. And then if you look at, we have 17 open-ended responses. So usually we kind of need to read all those open-ended responses to look at the pattern and then to see to detect some kind of themes. For example, if you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's also I'll talk about taste, right? And if you keep going on and it's something talk about price, and also talk about promotion, and also talk about the husband, wife, friends, that kind of. So those are different themes. Why do you drink that brand of beer? And by the way, the most guys, they report actually based upon research that they buy beers pretty much They don't buy beer, by the way. That means their wife, goes to the grocery stores and then they buy whatever brand is on sale. That's kind of interesting, right? Okay, so let's look at the the codes that the coding that we look at it previously, based on the previous 17 responses. So we pretty much look at put into like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different categories, or 6 different, and then we kind of assign each category as a numerical code: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So basically, we kind of look at the 6 different type of responses, so that when we do statistical analysis, we can just talk about, let's say, what percentage of people talking about tastes, or what percentage of people talk about prices, that kind of thing.